We're live. Welcome to today's episode of MicroConf On Air. I'm your host, Rob Walling. Every other Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, we live stream for 30 minutes and we cover topics related to building and growing ambitious SaaS startups that bring us freedom and purpose and allow us to maintain healthy relationships. Sometimes we show up and we have hair caught on our face that's bothering us. If you guys can't see that, I must look like a crazy person. Thanks so much for joining us again. We had to postpone last week, so I think we have two shows in 2 weeks. We're doing one today and then one again next Wednesday, but it's good to have you back, regular listeners, regular audience members, and if this is your first time, welcome. As I said, we do these every other week, and we also float these out. We post them to YouTube, and then we put them on the MicroConf podcast feed. So if you're not checking out microconfpodcast.com, that RSS feed includes these episodes, which is really nice in case you missed one. You can do it asynchronously. You can 1.5x them as I do. And then we also do MicroConf refresh episodes where we go back over the best from their best talks of the last 10, 11 years of MicroConf. And we pull the audio and put them in that feed. And then we have some other special audio stuff that goes on that as well. So today, we're going to be talking about what SaaS founders need to know about accessibility in design. So it's accessibility for SaaS founders in essence. And today I'm welcoming an expert on the subject. Her name is Bette Hannon. She runs BHBiz websites. She's a web advisor to startups, WordPress accessibility, and Gravity forums. She is I'm trying to think. She says her pronouns are she and her. She's a wife, a mom, a grandma, and an aspiring anti-racist. Bette Hannon, welcome to the show.
Great, good to be here. Thanks, Rob.
And you're calling in. Are you in Portland? Is that right?
No, I'm in Bend, which is about 3.5 hours southeast on the other side of the mountain range.
Yep. So still in Oregon, but because you and I, so folks know, we've met each other 12-ish years ago when we both lived in Fresno. And then I relocated to Minneapolis, you to Bend, it sounds like. And then we ran into each other a couple weeks ago at MicroConf Portland Local.
That was fun.
You there.
Yeah.
So let's kick us off. I have some notes here I want to talk through. I used to be a software developer, not so much anymore, but I remember accessibility was always a thing that was on our mind, but it was often pushed to the corner, right? Or it was pushed to like the last thing of like, oh, now we need to go think about that and tack it on. So folks know, to set the stage, like what is web accessibility?
Yeah, and that way of that trend or that habit of pushing it up to the end is the most expensive way to do accessibility, by the way.
Yep.
So web accessibility is really about on online platforms, so websites, but also other kinds of platforms, SaaS, other things. It's making those accessible or usable to the broadest range of people, including people with disabilities. So people who are blind have a tool called a screen reader, and it basically reads out loud to them all of the content and structure of the page if it's properly formatted for that. So, for example, if your form has ARIA labels on it that can read out loud those things. People who have mobility impairments, they can't use a mouse, but they can use all kinds of assistive devices. There are thousands of them. Stephen Hawking had a little cheek sensor that he could kind of wink and blink and move around the web page. All of those, and at first, when I first started, I thought, oh my gosh, there's thousands of those devices. How would I ever account for all of that? Well, it all comes down to keyboard navigation. So if your SaaS or your website is keyboard navigable, if you can go to the site and start tapping the tab key or the shift tab key and you can get around, then that's part of accessibility. But accessibility is much broader than that too. It includes things like color contrast for people with visual impairments, but also, some of us that are over 50 now having that kind of issues with visibility and eyes are changing, people who are colorblind. And we even start to talk about things like trying to help people who have anxiety or depression or reading disabilities to, you want to break up your process or let people know where they are in the process. That reduces anxiety. So all kinds of things that you can include in accessibility.
That's really interesting. And so, if someone's out there, let's say a founder right now has a SaaS app that's doing a few grand a month and they're trying to get traction and such, and they're wondering, like, what portion of the population or like how many people are impacted by this? Because oftentimes, I mean, I know it's not the same, but if I'm running a SaaS app and 1% of my user base will use a feature, right? Or 1% of my user base is requesting a feature, usually I don't prioritize it. I know accessibility is different than building a feature, but the idea is, we have to prioritize these things. So give folks an idea.
So a couple things. Well, the UN says about 15% worldwide, globally, but CDC and other developed nations put that number higher, 20 to 25% of all U.S. adults. And so we think that that higher number is probably more accurate in terms of reporting, and that's at any one time. And that is for people who have a permanent or a temporary disability. If I break my hand really badly and I can't use a mouse for a while, that's a temporary disability. And so it can be a much bigger percentage of people than I would have ever imagined. And, if you can spend all kinds of marketing money trying to increase your audience by even just 5%. But, if you're trying to make things accessible, you can actually increase that audience by quite a bit. And so that's alone is a really great reason to start to think about making things accessible. The other thing is, depending on what you do and what you're offering, you may have some legal requirements to make your platform or your site accessible. People are being sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's the public accommodations section. And so, that's not the best reason to make things accessible, but, that's a really good motivation for a lot of people, is to try and avoid getting sued.
And, at your day job running your consulting firm, I know, your H1 on your website is we build accessible websites that help grow your business. Do you only design and build your own for clients, or do you also do clients ever call you in and they're like, look, we're halfway through the thing and we need you to consult and help us okay. So you do both. I mean, you're like,
we do both. And here's we don't build anything that's not accessible. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just an investment in our brand, right? And so once in a while, we'll have that sort of issue with the client where we'll say, look, this salmon colored button with the white font, that doesn't meet a color contrast guideline. And, sometimes once in a while they'll sign off and, totally release us from liability and agree that they will pay all of our costs if they ever get sued over all those kinds of legal things, mm-hmm. right? To get out of it. But, we really put a big investment in trying to make things accessible.
Right.
Yeah, we fix things too. So, yeah.
What got you into this? I know, when last time you and I talked 10 years ago, I think you were doing WordPress consulting. Yeah. But what was the path that got you to accessibility?
Yeah, we still do primarily WordPress in terms of our builds. We work with all kinds of platforms, of course, doing kind of audits and accessibility kind of feedback and consulting. But what got us into it is actually from the Central Valley, California. So Westlands Water District is a big agricultural water district in California. And they're actually structurally a part of the state of California. They're a special district. And that means because they're government, that they have to be accessible. They have a compliance requirement. And we had been helping them with their WordPress website for a couple of years. And then they came to us and said, hey, we have this. We're aware we now have this big compliance issue. And so we at first said, hey, let us, help you connect you with people who know way more about this. And they went, well, yeah, bring in those people, but we want you to be able to kind of be the ongoing partner for this. And that was, once we got in and the first time I saw a person who was blind navigate at a conference, at the registration table for a conference, go on their phone to the conference website. She's got her earbud in one side and she's listening, right? She's going, she turns to me and she says, where's the banjo room? And I'm like she got everything she needed without having to ask people or be dependent or what. And that sense of, wow, the impact that you can make on people's lives, that you can help them be independent. And, and then after that, hearing horror stories from people where, they have to depend on a stranger at the ATM to help them with their banking or, right. Some of those kinds of things. It's really, you just want to make the world but I mean, it's it's kind of a karma thing too, right? Yeah. It's just a really incredible thing to feel like you're changing impacting people's lives in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an incredible time in history, right? Because we have these mobile computers in our pocket. with incredible visual abilities. I mean, I have an app that I can take a picture of like a sign in German and it translates it to English, right? Which is incredible. And 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I'm imagining if I'm hearing impaired or I'm blind, you have probably clunky big devices, if you have anything at all, to help me navigate the world, right?
And actually, all of those things, a lot of those kind of tools that we depend on today, all started out as tools for people with disabilities, like the AI stuff, all of the Google Home and Alexa and all of those things really started as kind of tools to help people with disability, and then kind of crossed over into the mainstream. And really, there's kind of a parallel. When you make your website more accessible, you're really improving the user experience for everybody, right? And I sometimes call that the curb cut effect, right? Curb cuts are originally for wheelchairs or carts, mobility carts, but we all use the curb cuts, right? When we're biking or using strollers or dragging our luggage. And so, it's a way that you can improve that user experience for everybody.
Yeah. If folks listening or watching, if you have a question, please pipe that into our Slack channel at MicroConf On Air. Producer Xander will bring those questions in. It's always good to have audience participation. While we're waiting on questions, accessibility on the web especially has been, I know there's a lot of overlap with SEO.
Yes.
You want to talk us through that?
Yeah. So a lot of what makes websites accessible in terms of things like alt text on your images or your proper heading structure with your H tag, so one and one only H1 tag, and then properly nested all the way down. All of those things are also things that Google is using and other search engines for ranking your site. And so when you do accessibility right, in terms of putting all those other things together, all of the schema pieces, all of those all get pulled into screen readers and keyboard navigation for accessibility. So, when you make your site accessible, you're almost always definitely improving your SEO as well.
And you had mentioned something about the opportunity of having accessibility improving your churn rates. If let's say you're a SaaS app where folks can cancel. Talk me through that.
Yeah. So we know that statistically disabilities increase as people age. We could think about that, just even like vision related changes, but all kinds of other disabilities. As you have more exposure, you can have more accidents, you can, lose a hand or, all kinds of things. So disabilities increase as people age. So making your site accessible is in a sense an investment in your current customers, right? Your current customers can stay with you as they develop disabilities because you're making it accessible for them.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Looks like we have a question from someone in the audience. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making when trying to make their product accessible? I'd imagine the big one is they don't at all, right? They don't even think about it. So maybe aside from that, yeah.
They don't at all. And then the next one, I'll talk about some of the specifics about accessibility, but the other one is they wait until the end to tack it on. And then it's really hard to go back and kind of retrofit things. It's easier if you're starting and building things out to think about accessibility from the beginning in terms of even things like color choices for your design that are going to be good for making the correct buttons and color font contrast, right? So things like that are harder to change once you get them established. It doesn't sound like that, but then once you have it starts to add up. So you want to definitely think about that going forward. And then all of the coding. Common places where people could make a quick impact are going to be alt text on your images. Not all images. You got to read on that. If it's a decorative image like a spacer or a divider, that doesn't get an alt text, but it gets it just has nothing there. But alt text on images, properly nested H tags, and then color contrast with your fonts. Those are the kind of the big three. If you take care of those, that's generally speaking about I would say 75% of all of your accessibility issues. The one thing to watch out for, though, is there are, a couple things. One is there are automated AI devices that will let you test your website accessibility. You can put your URL into an automated tester, and it'll spit out kind of a grade, or give you a list of those issues. Those automated AI testing only catches about 30% of accessibility issues.
Wow.
So you will always want to go back, because a lot of the accessibility guidelines and things are really context driven, right? AI can tell that you do or don't have alt text on an image, but it can't tell whether that's really good alt text, right? Is the alt text, JPEG 54693? That's not accessible, really, right? Is it got alt text that's really giving context? So only about 30%. And then for many sites, there are growing SaaS companies that are putting what's called overlays on. So they purport to give you, one line of JavaScript, or, a plugin on your WordPress site, and they will make your site accessible. Well, those sites are driven by that AI. So they're really only catching that little bit. And they're really marketing, they're playing on people's fears about lawsuits. But if you read the fine print, they don't stand behind you on the lawsuit piece, right? There's a lot that's on you in terms of that compliance. Overlays often also clash or create conflicts with the existing tools that disabled users already have on their machines, rendering neither of them functional. So they often can make things even worse. It's a great website called overlayfactsheet.com that explains how all that works, and that's a really great place to start.
That's cool. So I like that summary. I was going to ask you, what are the 2 or 3 things that people should focus on? And then, you just laid those out. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Yeah. So,
we talked about a lot of things. I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is that, making your platform, your SaaS, your website accessible can really be an investment in your own brand. So there's a lot of studies show that around 60% or more of buyers will be values-driven buyers. So if they have 2 choices, and they will either avoid or buy from a particular vendor based on the values that are being shown there, right? We want to buy from the local people who are supporting our community, or we're going to boycott the company that uses a sweatshop, right? And so those values-driven buyers are huge. And so if you have competition that's doing the same, making that investment in making your site more accessible says that you want to be more inclusive, right? Yep. And it's not just inclusive of people who have a disability, but if I have a friend or a family member that has a disability, then I care about how they're treated in the world.
Right.
So, for example, several years back, I sent a Calendly link to a blind vendor that was going to help, a blind contractor that was going to help us on a project to schedule with me. And she had to get back to me to say she couldn't use that link because it wasn't accessible. The Calendly picker was not accessible. So I got back to them, and I learned that it was a problem that had been identified for them. They knew about it. They said they had something in progress. Now that happens a lot. You'll hear back, oh yeah, we have something in the works. And then it, how it is with SaaS companies, right? It's not a high priority. It takes a long time. Yep. But fairly quickly, within a few months, they came back, and they're not, Calendly isn't perfect with accessibility, but it's now usable, right? But if I didn't feel like that was the best choice and going to be accessible for the people that I care about, I would have found a different vendor, right? I would have gone to something else. Right. And so those kinds of value-driven pieces can give you an edge in the market too. It's an investment in your own brand. And typically we see that when people put like an accessibility statement on their website or their SaaS. And it typically says, we want this to be workable for the most people. We're trying to use the website content accessibility guidelines, WCAG 2.1 at this standard, and then let us know if you have problems. Because in reality, it's, I would say it's not realistic. No site, no platform is probably 100% accessible. Right. And it's a journey. You're always improving your accessibility. And it's impossible when you start thinking about it when you start talking about people with multiple intersecting disabilities.
Right.
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 So it's really hard to accommodate. You can't even begin to think for every edge case of that. But you can if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I need transcripts with those videos. Well, then maybe that's something you can figure out you could do, right?
Right. Right. How do that? I mean, you said no one's 100% accessible, which makes sense. But like, how did some of the big players like Google, Facebook, Apple, how do they do on just with maybe their web apps? Like, have you ever looked through their sites and thought to yourself, they're doing a pretty good job? Or is it like, eh?
I haven't looked at those actually.
Okay.
I do look at people's websites for accessibility when I visit them,
Sure.
and we look at things. It's kind of like, when you encounter another SaaS app, you look at how they're, it's kind of a little quirk, right?
Well, yeah, that's what you do day to day, right? You're thinking
But
about it all the time.
those big companies like Google and Microsoft and Apple, they have accessibility experts in-house trying to work on things.
Sure.
So it's really the smaller to medium sized companies that really have a struggle.
Yep.
But you can get, the way that you can work on this is, you can do some reading, you can do some learning, and there's the standards. You can read its documentation. So
that's what I was going to ask is but is there like, if I were a developer and I'm like solo founder, barely scraping by, I don't want to read docs, but I might be open to reading like a summary, or like here are the top 5 or 10 things. Do you know of a good resource online that you could send people to be like, hey, this is the 80-20 of it?
Well, partly there are some good, webinars, presentations, recordings of some of those that are kind of some of that basic piece. And we talked about those 3 kind of big things at the beginning, but the 3 things you could do. So some of it is like starting to take care of those things. But also you can go to deque.com, and they have, they are a services company, but they have a learning section.
Okay.
And they will go to bigger companies and do kind of training for all their content creators, but they also have some on-demand courses, and the on-demand courses are pretty good. They will help you get a better sense of what is accessibility, how does it work, and then they offer some of those training pieces for folks that are getting ready to take the exam, but they can be very helpful for folks that are just wanting to get their feet wet a little deeper in terms of the development pieces of that. Another thing that you can do is and this is when you have a little more revenue, right? When you have some money to spend on it. And that is you can get what's called an audit. And so an accessibility audit, if you're going to have them do every single URL of your website or every single view of your app, that can get super expensive. And so typically what you see is something that's called a sampling audit. So you're often able to get 10 or 15 or 20 views audited, and you can extrapolate from there. That if it has this particular layout in this format has a problem, then it's all of those type are going to have a problem.
Right.
Okay. So that's a way to get some feedback. And an audit should not just include some automated testing, but it should have some human testing by trained developers and or even people with disabilities. And it's going to give you an exhaustive report of what was checked and what you need, what are the violations and what do you need to fix. And the best reports are the ones that are going to give you kind of just some, also in terms of kind of almost consultation and advice. You should work on this first. This is the most important problem. These other things need to be taken care of. These things can be done by someone without technical experience.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's kind of nice. How comfortable would you feel if we pulled up the MicroConf website and you just taking a peek at it and saying, oh, here's where you're doing well, here's where you're not. We're on Squarespace, so we are limited in like our page speed is not great, and there's just no way around it with Squarespace. But I'm sure that there have to be some kind of low-hanging fruit. Maybe some things we're doing well and things we're not doing great.
Can I share my screen?
I don't know. Yeah, there's a
I'll
share
show
button.
It to them. Yeah, okay. Sharing tips. Well, it says 2 monitors, but I don't do that. Share screen. Okay.
Because you need to actually be able to hover over, right, and see the
micro.
So producer Xander, if you can, I don't know if you have her screen or.
Isn't it microconf.com?
Yes. Is that not working?
Microconf. You see my screen?
It is not showing up as a shared screen, producer Xander says. So maybe it looks like he has.
Wait. Hang on. Here we go. Share. Now you got it?
Ta-da! Looks great.
Okay. There is a Chrome extension called for Wave. So wave.webaim.org is it gives one of these automated accessibility tools. So this is an automated tester, right? And so it comes up. And the thing to know about these automated testers is A, they only get 30%, but B, sometimes there are false positives and false negatives.
Sure.
So you're looking at that. And so the big thing when we're looking right away is some contrast pieces, right? So the white on the yellow doesn't meet contrast ratios. Like you're looking at the ratio between the yellow goldenrod background and the white font, and it doesn't meet the minimum
1.85 to 1. What should the ratio be minimum?
Right. Can you make it, whoops, that's lighter, right? Can you, it depends on the size of the text down here, right? So, right. So it could get darker, but you'll have to play with it, right? In terms of what the design piece, but you just know that that's not, and exactly. And this is probably not this, whatever this is up here. Yeah. Well, maybe it's only the goldenrod. Huh. Yeah. Looks like it's mostly just that goldenrod on the white. Nice. So you might switch that to black and it might be fine because you can see down here, this is okay. Or the dark gray, right? You can see that's okay. So maybe you just want to, instead of white on things, you just want the black on things. That would be a quick fix, right? And so then also it'll help you look at your structure. Right away, you got one H1. You got two H1s, it looks like. So you want one and only one H1 on the page. That's the page title in a screen reader. Right. And then you want everything under that. So maybe this gets bumped to an H2 and all of these H3s. Right. And some missing alt text on images, the contrast, suspicious alter text. I don't know what that means. That's funny. I don't know, but I'm not sure what that means. But anyway, then you got some checks. You got some things are working well.
Some
here.
Greens,
So
flexes, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the designers who did this are pretty sharp, and they are accessibility aware. But it maybe wasn't like you said, no one's 100%, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
that's cool. Awesome. Well, yeah. Thanks for running through that, and thanks
for being willing to do that because that's kind of like it's kind of a vulnerability. Right?
Oh, totally. Because it could be an unmitigated disaster. But I had confidence that we were at least we have something in place to do it. So if folks want to keep up with you, you are Bet Hannon on Twitter, BetHannon, and your website URL is
BHM Biz Sites.
BHMBizSites.com.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me today, Bet.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. As we roll out, thank you to Hay and Stripe. They're our headline partners this year and next year. If you're watching this on YouTube, please, seriously, like and subscribe. It's cool. This video was good. You can like it and you can subscribe. It's good to see you this week. I will see you again next week for another amazing episode. Bye.